A brand new report from the Congressional Budget Office gives politicians a choice they probably won't like.
Here's what it says, quote, a substantial reduction in the growth of spending, a significant increase in tax revenues, or some combination of the two will be necessary to maintain the nation's long-term fiscal stability.
But here's the question. You can say those things, but will lawmakers listen and exercise a little fiscal restraint? Let's ask our Fox panel. Mike Norman from the Economic Contrarian Update. Tom Atkins from Remax Fairlawn. Euron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute, who's here in New York, we're happy to say. Gary Kaltbaum from GaryK.com, who's somewhere in the cybersphere. And Peter Schiff, author of Crash Proof. Thank you, folks, for coming in. Well, Euron, since it's the first time I've seen you in person, good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Let's ask, it's one thing to say pay-go and all these other plans. The CBO comes out with this statement. Will Congress ever spend within their means?
No. I mean, there's no incentive for them to do so. There's no, there's no ideology that would dictate that they do. They're just going to go ahead and spend. They'll slow it down periodically, as they have in the past. They'll accelerate when they have the cash. They'll accelerate it. But we're in a period of deficit spending, and there's no reason for them to slow that down. There's nothing down the pike other than a major economic problems that will do anything.
Tom, I've got to ask you, because as we look toward what the CBO has to say, this is a nonpartisan organization that says it just provides the facts, and they're flat out saying stop spending, get more tax revenues somehow, one or both, but get it done. Right. Is it going to get done?
Well, no, but first of all, let's describe CBO. CBO is a completely static organization. Everything they do is static. Every time we've had tax cuts proposed, they said, oh my God, don't do that because we're going to get less revenue. And every time they've been wrong, you get more revenue because we cut taxes, you typically get more revenue. So the CBO is dead wrong on that. However, they are correct when they say we got to stop spending money on stupid programs that don't work. Everybody's known that for 50 years. That's no mystery. Will it get done? No, because politicians are professional panderers. They essentially go out there every time they go out and go, we're going to give you free beer, vote for me. I'll give you free donuts and beer, vote for me instead. Now who's going to? It becomes this pandering game, and that's why it'll never get done.
Well, Mike? What about just starving them of the resources? Cutting taxes can have a benefit in terms of bringing in more revenue sometimes if it stimulates economic activity, but at least it gives them less to play with, usually.
There's absolutely no empirical or historical evidence that budget deficits create any kind of a problem. Look, you can go to the Treasury website back to 1789 and look at every single year. For 70% of the years of this country, we've run deficits. For the other 30%, we've had balanced budgets or slightly in surplus. The times when we've seen the greatest economic growth and therefore the greatest revenues coming back to the Treasury have been times that followed the greatest deficit. So I don't know where they're coming up with these numbers. Are they saying that at some point in the future?
We'll be able to ask the guy who came up with these numbers in just a minute. He's going to be joining us in just a minute, the guy from the CBO who authored this study.
Well, so does David Walker, who's the controller, the controller general. He's been going around the country saying that the country's bankrupt, but I think that's a
$9 trillion worth of debt is a lot of debt.
As a percentage,
it's a lot of tax increases in the future that somebody is going to have to pay off.
Let's bring in Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff, do deficits matter?
Of course they matter.
How?
We've spent ourselves into oblivion. But, you know, what the government needs to do is cut spending, of course, but unfortunately they're not going to do either. They're not going to raise taxes. They're not going to cut spending. Revenues are going to fall off a cliff in this recession, and unfortunately the government's going to print up the difference, and they're going to create massive inflation. They're going to drive the value of the dollar into the ground, and the cost of living is going to go through the roof for every single American. It's unfortunate, but this is what's going to happen.
Well, Gary Kaltbaum, it is true that at times when everybody's writing off because of their tax purposes, people are writing off some of their debts. That means the government's going to get a lot less revenue, which means the deficit is going to start to balloon like it probably hasn't in years.
Well, look, I don't think our lawmakers don't even know how to spell the word restraint at this point in time. And yes, here is the big problem. The CBOE is using a 1.7% GDP growth in 2008 to come up with their budget numbers. I'm not so sure we may even get there. Anything lower, and it will blow up. And you know our government, they are never going to stop spending. We've tried that. We've been yelling and screaming at them for years. And even the guys that get newly elected and said, oh, I'm going to fix things up, what do? They go in there and 300 earmarks in the first week, so it's a problem going forward.
You're on the budget deficit, as the CBO says, and again, we are going to have Peter Orszag. He is the author of this study here. about $250 billion. Okay, that doesn't even take into account this $150 billion stimulus package. What would that do to the picture?
Well, it would make it a lot worse, and it doesn't take into account extra spending on Iraq and on Afghanistan, which hasn't been approved yet.
Or the rebate.
And it doesn't, or the rebate, but it doesn't also take into account the fact that we might be going to a recession. That is, they're estimating 1.7% GDP growth. What if it's negative GDP growth, or what if it's just 0.5%
Or what if it's higher? What if it's higher?
And it might be
Look,
higher.
the
But
deficit,
the point is that the government has gotten away from the principle of what the U.S. government was founded to do, which is defend individual
But
rights.
that's
And
never
it seems
happened.
like
We're not gonna
crazy.
argue with that.
It has.
It's never happened. I just told you
it
that
happened. It happened in the 19th century, and I know we have a long-going debate on the 19th century. It happened in the 19th century.
We do.
And the U.S. economy grew during that period at
Listen,
9,
Peter,
10, 11% growth rate.
Tom,
There's
last
no
word.
reason.
Tom, last
We
word.
have a $13.2 trillion economy, $250 billion is 1.8%. It's a deck chair off the Queen Mary. I'm not going to complain about cutting spending and creating more revenue by lowering taxes. You'll never get me to complain
A
about
deck
that.
chair on the Queen Mary. I love
Off the Queen
those
Mary.
analogies. All right. Well, we got plenty.